All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Let us begin. So first, let's begin by thanking our sponsors, our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Tishrei, Avraham and Shaindy Kelman, for dedicating all the shurim this month in memory of their parents. To thank Jack Bennett, our TALMUD TORAH sponsor, for dedicating the shurim this month in memory of Givati Brigade First Sergeant Nikolai Rappaport, and Dr. Linda Weinberg for dedicating all the shurim in memory of her husband, Dr. Paul Weinberg Peretz Moshe ben Avraham David. Our week of learning sponsors, Ira Miriam Grossman in commemoration of the Yahrzeit of Ira's father, Melvin E. Grossman. We hope that in the merits of our TALMUD TORAH, all of the neshamos will have an aliyah, and the families a nechama. And with that, let us begin. Can you hear me all right? Yeah? Okay. So we'll say, so today's daf is Chaf. And we are picking up in Meretz Hashem on, we left off at the two dots on the bottom of Yud Tes Amud Beis 19b. We have an incredible sugya ahead of us today. So remember again, according to Beitzah over here, so we are now 4 lines up from the bottom. V'yotzei ba mishum simcha ve'en yotzei ba mishum chagiga. So the halacha is, remember we were discussing a lot of discussion yesterday. But one of the topics that we got very much involved in was the bringing of a carbon toda on Yom Tiv. So we had a brayso that said you can't bring it on Pesach. Why? Chametz, right? You can't bring it on Atzeres because it's Yom Tiv. But yet the Gemara said you can bring it on Sukkot. So we didn't understand that statement. Turned out what the Gemara really meant was, when can you bring it on Sukkot? On Chalamayid. You can bring it on Chalamayid. The brayso also said that ultimately, again, Yotziba Mishum Simcha, if you bring a carbon toda, you could use it for simcha, which means the meat that you get from that carbon ultimately can go ahead and be used to satisfy your obligation of v'samachta b'chagecha, to rejoice on Yom Tiv. Ve'ena yotzeba mishum chagiga, but you cannot use the carbon toda to fulfill your obligation of bringing a carbon chagiga. Says the Gemara Pshita, it's obvious. Both sides, the obligation of chagiga is, or I should say, a chagiga is an obligatory offering. And any obligatory offering could only come from an unconsecrated animal. We spoke about this yesterday a little bit, that you cannot satisfy obligations, we're called carbonic obligations, with already sanctified animals. So a toda, which is a sanctified animal, cannot be used to go ahead and satisfy our carbonic obligation. To which the Gemara says, Lo tzricha, da'af agav de parish, even though, what it's coming to teach us is what it says as follows, even though I know that halacha l'maisa, I really can't use a carbon toda to satisfy my chagiga obligation, what happens if I went ahead and separated it anyway? In other words, I know I'm not supposed to do it, but let's say I did it. I separated out my carbon toda, and I said, this is also going to be my chagiga. The Gemara says, it's coming to teach you that even if you went ahead and you did separate it out, when you should not have separated it out, halacha l'maisa, it does not work. The Gemara says, Kidibai minei, Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Yochanan, as Rish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan, Ha'omer hare alai toda ve'etzei ba yedei chagiga. If a person says, I hereby take upon myself an obligation to bring a toda, and I also want to use that toda to satisfy my chagiga obligation, or, for example, harini nazir, a person says, I hereby accept upon myself an edron nazirus, top of chaf, ve'agalech mima'os meiser sheni. And remember again, when a person finishes their Nazirite vow, so what's the halacha? You go ahead and you have to bring karbanos. Let's say a person says, the money from my karbanos, from my neder nazirus, should come from meiser sheni money. Mahu, what's the halacha? Amar le nader ve'eno yotzei, nazir ve'eno megalech. He said, well, you took upon yourself the obligation to bring a toda, so you have to bring a toda, but that toda doesn't count towards your chagiga. And by the way, now you're a nazir, and you cannot bring the Nazirite karbanos from monies of meiser sheni. So both say, so there's two things that are happening over here. First of all, davar shebechol ve'eno ba ela min achun. That's an important principle. Any obligatory offering can only come from unconsecrated funds. So in other words, because of what I think about it, it's a great chap. If something is already consecrated, let me just double up. Right? So, for example, I have money of meiser sheni, no problem. I just have to eat that and you have to use that in Yerushalayim. Let me just use that to take care of my Nazirus karbanos. Or I have a carbon toda anyway that I have to bring. Let me use that for chagiga. does not work. Davar shebechova eno ba ela min ha'chulin, which is an incredible use. And therefore, again, in these cases, even if a person explicitly made that t'nai, I hereby take upon myself a carbon toda, and I'm going to use it as a chagiga. How does halacha translate that phrase? You obligated yourself to a toda. Oh, and by the way, you also have to bring what? A chagiga, right? Or I'm hereby a nazir, I'm going to use the money of Meiser Sheni to go ahead and take care of my Nazirite karbanos. Fantastic. How does halacha go ahead and interpret that? You're a nazir, and you also have to pay for the karbanos. Which Shabbos tells you an incredible yesod in life. There are no shortcuts to accomplishing the things you need to accomplish in life. Person wants to be a nazir, right? What does a nazir represent? Someone who wants an elevated level of kedusha. Fantastic. You can't double up on something else in order to become a nazir. You want to go ahead and boost yourself forward in life? No shortcuts for that. A person wants to go ahead and be the kind of person who ultimately, again, we agree, I don't have to illustrate every example, but that's the yesod. Absolutely no shortcuts to accomplishment in life. An incredible yesod. Says the Gemara, Hahu Gavra, so now that we're mentioning conditions, the Gemara just brings up another interesting case. Hahu Gavra, the Amr Lahu, there was a guy. Now Rashi points out over here, this is not just any guy. Rashi says, Mitzave Machmas Misahaya, Shriv Mirav. This is a guy on his deathbed and is making certain statements or wanting, certain is the wrong word. He is issuing certain commands from his deathbed. Now I will say we know that in general, verbal commands in halacha are pretty much meaningless, with the exception of Shriv Mirav. Divrei Shriv Mirav, Kiksuvin v'chimsurin damu. The words of a shchiv mira are as if they are papered, as if they're written down. So this guy is on his deathbed, and what happens? Damar luhu, havlu arba meyazuzi leploni, give 400 zuz to Ploni, v'lansiv barti, and I want him to marry my daughter. Just give him 400 zuz, I want him to marry my daughter. Amra Papa, so Papa says, well, good for this guy. Arba meya shakil, ubarte ibay nasiv, ibay lo nasiv. The guy gets the money, and if he wants to marry the daughter, he can marry the daughter. But if he doesn't want to, he doesn't have to. In other words, the way the halacha interprets that statement is there's two different things happening over here. There's a gift of 400 zuz, and there is a request, please marry my daughter. However, Taimur da'amar havu le'velansiv. The reason that's so is because of the order of things as they're said. The Shchiv Meirah says, give the money and let him marry my daughter. So those are two really separate things. Aval, I amar linsiv, v'havulei. So if he were to say, if this man marries my daughter, or let him marry my daughter and give him 400 zuz, then I basically understand it to be what? A conditional gift. Right? Then, I nasiv shakil. If he marries the girl, he gets the money. V'ilo nasiv lo shakil. And if he does not marry her, he does not get the money. Good. Both say the only reason this is being brought up is because it's similar to the previous case where also he was making it tonight. I'm going to bring a carbon toda and I'm going to use it for my chagig. I'm going to become a nazir and I'm going to use my Meiser Sheni money. That's the connection over here. Beautiful. Weiter. There's a lot to say on carbon toda. Also, if we have time, I'll come back to it later. Yosiv Mereimar v'ka'amar lahashmaisa mishmei din afshe. Both say so. Again, Mereimar was sitting, and he went ahead and he said over this ruling in his name, or I should say he didn't give it. Well, let's do Rashi. Lahashmaisa. Which ruling are we talking about? Da omer harei alai toda v'teitze ba yidei chagiga. That if a guy says, I hereby take upon myself a toda, and I'm going to use it to go ahead and fulfill my obligation of chagiga. So remember again, what did the Beitzah say? What was the halacha? You have to bring a toda, but you're going to also have to bring a chagiga. Now he said it mishmei din afshei. Rashi says, v'lo amar lei b'lashon baya ela me'elav amra. So you both say, the way we read this case was almost as a question and answer. Right? So if a person says this, what's the status of that statement? When Mereimar said this over, he did not read it as a question and an answer. Instead, he just read it, he gave it over as a statement. So finish Rashi, he says, so Ela me'ilav amra, ha'omer harei alai toda, be'etzei ba yedei chagiga, harini nazir v'agalech mimos ma'aser sheni, nadr ve'eno yotzei, nazir ve'eno megalech. So ultimately, it was the Gemara is just saying, Meimar is not arguing. It was just a different way of reading the previous text. That whereas when the Gemara presented it, it was more of a question and an answer. Mereimar just read it as a straight-off statement. Amrali Ravina le So Ravina said to Mereimar, Asun hachi masnisalo. This is your version of this. Anon kideboi minei Reish Lakish me Rabbi Yochanan masnilo. We, in our version of it, we have it phrased as a question that Reish Lakish was asking Rabbi Yochanan. I both say, now the truth is, the conclusion is the same. Right, the conclusion is the same. That Allah Chalamaisa, again, you are obligated for a Todah, and it doesn't satisfy your obligation for Chagiga, right? And you're going to be a Nazir, and you can't use the Ma'aser Sheni money for your Karbanos. Again, it was just a question of how the discussion was recorded. Is it a question answer, or is it just a statement of both? So remember again, you'll say to yourself, who cares, right? Why does it matter? So remember again, it's very important, just because when Torah Shebal Peh was Bal Peh, right? When Torah Shebal Peh once upon a time was verbal, knowing how conversations were stated, question, answer. Remember again, even think about just for committing something to memory, committing a question, answer versus a statement. Just again, bottom line is the same, but how it was recorded made a difference. Tani Tana Kamid Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Abba. So let's listen to this. The Tana taught before, Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Abba. The pasuk says, Vayakriv es ha'olah, vayaseh k'mishpat. He offered up the olah, and they went ahead and they did it according to the law. Vayaseh k'mishpat. The Rebbe was saying, now what's happening over here? Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Vayakriv es ha'olah, olas yom shmini shal miluim. This is talking about the olah that was offered up on the 8th day of the Miluim. Remember again, the Miluim refers to the inauguration of the Mishkan. So remember again, for 8 days, right? We know this, so for 8 days, they went ahead and they inaugurated the Mishkan. Rashi says, Shehitil HaKosov, Al Aaron Chova Liyom, Kach Locha Egel Ben Bakar Lechatos, the Ayil La'ola. So remember again, each of the days of the Miluim, Aaron had an obligation. Ultimately, again, this is, not the 8 days of the Miluim, I said that wrong. It's Yom Shmini, the 8th day. Remember again, for the first 7 days of the inauguration of the Mishkan, it was Moshe Rabbeinu who effectively was acting as the Kohen Gadol. On day number 8 is when Moshe Rabbeinu hands over the reins to Aaron. So this pasuk is referring to over here on day number 8. What did Aaron offer? He offered up an Egel ben Bakar, a calf, as a chatos, and an ayil, a ram, as an olah. Fine. So the pasuk says, "Vayasek mishpat." Now look at Rashi. One more Rashi. I'm sorry. Vayasek mishpat. Ma mishpat ha'amar ba'olas chova al karche mishpat hamafurash ba'olas nedava. So actually, let's take a look. Rashi says over here, the Gemara says, how did Aaron offer up the olah? So the Gemara says, "Kemishpat olas nedava." That ultimately, again, the olah of the miluim of the inauguration was offered up the same way as an olas nidava. As an olas nidava. Limeid al olas chova shetu'una smicha. Both say, so what does that mean, that the olas chova, right? The olah of Aaron on the day of inauguration was offered up in the same way as an olas nidava. It teaches us that halacha l'maisa, an olas chova requires smicha, requires leaning. That's what's happening over here. And Rashi says over here, if you go back to Rashi v'yasek mishpat, very quickly, Rashi says, Ma mishpat amar ba'olas chova al karchei kamishpat hamafurash ba'olas nedava. Right? Meaning, when it says kamishpat, it means the olas chova, an obligatory olah, was done in the same way that not an optional, olas nedava, a voluntary olah was offered up. Ushlamim sham namru ubishlam nedava dibra kasav dichsiv adam kakru mikem mashmach l'shirtzi yakruv uksiv hasam v'samach yado. So ultimately, again, just as the olas nedava requires smicha, so too the olas chova requires smicha. Amarle damar lechamani beishamai. Ultimately, again, whose opinion does this reflect? It must be beishamai. Delo gamri shalmei chova mishalmei nedava. Because Beishamai, again, in general, does not learn out the halachas of obligatory shlamim from voluntary shlamim. Di'i Beis Hillel, kivan de gamri shalmei chova mishalmei nedava. Because since Beis Hillel ultimately learns out shalmei chova from shalmei nedava, olas chova nami lo tibaikra. You don't need a pasuk to teach you about olas chova. Why? The gamri me olas nedava. Because you can simply learn out from the halachas of olas nedava. How do you know that Beis Hillel learns out Shalmei Chova from Shalmei Nedava? Dilma me'olas chova gamri. Maybe he learns that from olas chova. Va'olas chova gufa bayikra. And olas chova itself will require a pasek. So my shna mishalmi nedava delo gamri. So why would this be any different than shalmi nedava that you learn it out from? To which the Gemara says shekin mitsuyin. Shalmi nedava are different because shalmi nedava are common. So the Gemara says me olas chova nami lo gamri. You can't learn out from olas chova either. Why? Shekin kalil. Because we're saying olas chova is unique in that it is fully consumed on the mizbeach. Ella asya mibinaya. Rather, the Gemara says you're right. We learn Mibinaya, but that Mibinaya ultimately again means from like a common denominator. Look at Rashi. It's Rashi on the first of the intermediate lines. Asya Mibinaya li'olam masnisin the tani chada divrei hakolhi va'afilu beisila bayikra ume'achar de kamlon smicha ba'olas chova mehaikra asulu shamchov. So again, Rashi goes on to explain. Really, what's happening over here is it's learned out from the common denominator from both halachas. The Sari Beis Hillel, Shalmi Chova Lo Bo Smicha. Now the Beishamai actually hold Rabosek because the Gemara made a statement before that Shalmi Chova do not require Smicha. Is that true? Vatanya Am Rabbi Yossi Lo Nechleku Beishamai U Beis Hillel Ala Smicha Atzma Shetzarich. So listen to this, Rabosai. Rabbi Yossi, and of course we're jumping back now to the Mishnah for just a moment. Remember again, how did this whole machlokes begin? The machlokes Beishamai and Beis Hillel in the Mishnah was on two topics, right? Remember again, according to Beis Shammai, you could bring shlamim, you can't bring olos. You can bring shlamim, you can't bring olos. Beis Hillel said, you could bring shlamim, you could bring olos, and you could do smicha. Now, interestingly enough, so right, I'm sorry, one more thing. Beis Shammai says, you could bring shlamim, you can't do smicha, and you can't bring olos. Beis Shammai says, you could bring shlamim, you could bring olos, and you could do smicha. So the Gemara says over something very interesting. The Gemara says, "Vatanya Rabbi Yossi lo nechluku beisham beisila ala smicha asma shetzarich." Beisham beisila both agree that conceptually you require smicha for a carbon. So what's the machlokes? But yet Beis Shammai said in the Mishnah that you don't do smicha on Yom Tiv. Ama nechluku al tekif l'smicha shchita. Rabbi said this. I alluded to this a little bit yesterday. The machlokes is about the following halacha, which is, does smicha have to take place immediately preceding shchita or not? Beis Shammai omrim inu tzarich. Beis Shammai says you don't need to, which is right about saying in the Mishnah. What does Beis Shammai say? When Beis Shammai says in somchin, right, that you could offer up, can't offer up olos, but you can offer up shlamim. The in somchin, you don't do smicha. What does that mean? You don't do smicha according to Beis Shammai. What does that mean? You don't do smicha on Yom Tiv, but when do you do smicha? On Erev Yom Tiv. On Erev Yom Tiv. Beis Hillel omrim tzarichu. Beis Hillel holds that halacha l'maisa no takif the smicha shchita that you require smicha right before shchita. That's why Beis Hillel not only allows you to go ahead and shech shlamim and olos, but also allows you to do smicha on Yom Tiv. Hu de Amar Kiyai Tana. He holds like the following Tana. The Sanyo Amr Rabbi Yossi Bar Rabbi Yehuda Lo nechluku Beis Shammai u Beis Hillel. I'll take it for the smicha shchita shetzarich. Beis Shammai Beis Hillel don't disagree that you require, or they agree that you require smicha right before shchita. Sa'amar nechlaku. What do they argue about? Ala smicha atzma. They argue about smicha itself. Shebeis Shammai omrim eino tzarich. Ubeis Hillel omrim tzarich. Ultimately, again, I will say, what's they arguing about? Their argument is about smicha itself. Does ultimately, again, a carbon require smicha or not? Beis Shammai says it doesn't. Beis Hillel says it doesn't. We reject that version of their machlokes. Everyone agrees that a carbon requires smicha. The machlokes ultimately is, does smicha need to be right before shchita or not? We paskin like Beis Hillel that halacha l'maisa, what we call takif l'smicha shchita. That ultimately, again, smicha itself must be done immediately preceding shchita. Incredible. So both say, so let's go back to a little bit. So we still require, we have a lot of balls in the air over here, right? And a lot of different sugyas that we still have not found resolution on. How do we paskin like Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai, Nidarma, Nidavas, and we spoke about a little bit, and now take off the smicha shchita. We'll bring it all together. Tana Abanan. Both say, an incredible case. Tana Abanan. Listen to this. Ma'aseh Hillel Hazaken. Both say there was a story with Hillel Hazaken. Now, Hillel Hazaken means Hillel, right? Hillel. So there was a story with Hillel Hazaken. Shehevi ola sula azara lismoch ala biyamtiv. See, he brought an ola to the Beis Hamikdash. He brought an ola to the Beis Hamikdash, and he was going to do smicha on it on Yom Tiv. Now, there's two things happening over here, right? Number one, what is he bringing? What is he bringing? An ola, right? That's number one. Number two, what is he going to do? Smicha. Okay, fine. Now, we'll say, not a big deal. That's shitas, right? That's shitas Hillel, right? That's what Hillel holds. You can bring olas, you can do smicha. Listen to this. Chavru alav talmidei Shammai azakin. Ultimately, again, the students of Shammai ganged up on him. This is Hillel. The students of Shammai ganged up on him in the Beis Hamikdash. Amru lo, ma tiva shel behemazu. They said, what kind of animal is that? See, what they were trying to figure out, was he offering up an olah, or was he offering up a shlamim? If it was a shlamim, fine. If it's an olah, they were going to give him a hard time. So what happened? Amar lahem, he said to them, Nekevahi, don't worry, it's a female. Now what is that? Rashi says, She'ein ola nekeva. So he told them, don't worry guys, it's just a shlamim. It's just a shlamim, right? It's a female animal. Female animal is not brought as an ola. So he told them it's a shlamim. He told them it's a shlamim. So the Gemara says, what happened? So the vikishke shlam biznava. So he was going to move the tail to show them that it's a female, but v'hol chulam, they believed him, so he didn't move the tail. So we'll say, so what happens? Va'os hayom gavra yadam shal Beis Shammai. That day, Beis Shammai was stronger than Hillel. So we'll say an incredible. You'll see the power of this mice in just a moment. So that day, the school of thought of Shammai, which tells you that what? Number one, you can't offer olos. Number two, you can't do smicha, right? Because here the Talmidim of Shammai literally again surrounded Hillel. Hillel had to change the truth. He had to change the truth, right? Because again, remember, that I just want to be clear. Remember again, he was offering up an olah. He told them that it was a shlamim by telling them that it was a female animal. He said, I'll even show you. Now they didn't call his bluff, right? They didn't call his bluff, so he didn't have to show them, but he lied, right? He changed the truth. We'll see why Hillel did that in just a moment. So that day, the position of Shammai became dominant over the position of Hillel. So it says the Gemara, "V'haya sham zakin echad mitamidei Shammai hazaken." There's standing around a certain elder who was one of the Talmidim of Shammai, right? Of Shammai Azaken. Ubava ben Buta Shmo. His name was Bava ben Buta. Shahayodea Shalacha Kebeis Hillel. Now I will say this individual ultimately again was a student of Shammai, but he knew that the halacha really followed Hillel. So what did he do? So the Gemara says, V'shalach. What did he do? V'shalach on the days Vehevi kol tzon kedar shebushalayim. Apparently he was a wealthy individual. He bought all of the sheep in Yerushalayim. And Rashi, not only sheep, tzon kedar, which are the best sheep, right? Vehemidan ba'azara. He brought them to the Beis Hamikdash. V'amar kol misha rotza lismoch yavo v'yismoch. And he made it, right? He made an announcement to whoever wants to come and do smicha on these animals. Come a massive smicha event, right? Massive smicha event, right? So come and go ahead and do smicha on the animals. So we'll say it's actually interesting. Rashi says over here, how is this halachically possible? You're not allowed to bring. You're not allowed to bring unconsecrated animals to the Beis Hamikdash, to the Azara. So Tosas says over here, "Vehevi kol tzon keder ba'azara, v'tim ha'in mavin chulin la'azara, v'yishlomar delav dafka ba'azara ela b'harabayis." So it doesn't mean Bava ben Buta did not actually bring these animals. He didn't bring this flock of sheep into the Beis Hamikdash. He brought them to Harabayis, Temple Mount, and he said, whoever wants to come, do smicha, take these animals, offer it up as karbanos, harashus biyadan. So we'll say, so what happened? Va'os hayom gavra yadan shal Beis Hillel v'kavu halacha kimosan v'lo haya shum adam she'ir b'davar klum. So I'll say after this event, the halach became clear, right? Gavra yadan shal Beis Hillel. So the hands of Hillel, right? Literally again, the position of Beis Hillel became supreme, right? Ultimately again became the dominant opinion, and no one ever argued on Beis Hillel again. So I will say, so first of all, there's so much to learn from this story, which is also very interesting that sometimes I will say you see that like the followers of great people often go ahead and exploit the teachings of their teachers to go ahead and engage in inappropriate and egregious behavior. One of the most famous machloksim in pre-state Eretz Yisrael was Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, right, the Rav of Yerushalayim, and Rav Kook. And there was often, there are crazy stories about what the followers of Rav Sonnenfeld did to Rav Kook. Crazy stories. And what people don't realize is the two of them, although they had incredible machloksim in many, many, many different areas, had an incredible mutual respect for each other. And sometimes people take ideology, real like lishma, like a machlokes l'shim shamayim, and they translate it into just abhorrent behavior. And it's so dangerous because especially sometimes when you feel that you're fighting for a religious cause, it becomes a license to go ahead and engage in so much negative behavior. So like, you look at what's happening over here, what a chutzpah. It's all lazoking. What do you think you are? Right, you're telling me that is right. You've been in yeshiva for 13 minutes, so suddenly again you're going ahead and you're being chutzpah to Hillel Azakin. You see this. I think it's one of the issues that sometimes confronts Klal Yisrael a little bit, and you see it in a lot of different areas. You see sometimes the way people speak. I'm not talking about myself, but you see the way people speak to Rabbanim, about Rabbanim, and they think you're taking a principled stance. But a person has to be a Bal Derech Eretz. Just in yesterday in Eretz Yisrael, there was a crazy event that was happening in Meir Sharim. There was scaffolding. Somebody built a sukkah. On scaffolding that was like 50 meters tall. So the police came. They took it down. And there was like a mob. There was a riot. What's happening to us? First of all, who's the idiot who built a sukkah on scaffolding? Right? You're obviously puster because you're a shota, right? So I'm saying, what is it even? What are you doing? But that you didn't go ahead and riot over that, as if something so egregious is. We've lost a little bit. We've lost a little bit about the ability to disagree with dignity and to go ahead and espouse differing opinions in the right way. COVID has certainly not helped any of that on a variety. But again, it's amazing to see that it's good to know it's not a new problem, right? That's what's good to know. So it's good to know that at the end of the day, for whatever the reason, people just have difficulty disagreeing with dignity or dialoguing with dignity. What a chutzpah. You disagree with Hillel, you're a Talmud of Shammai, let Hillel do what he wants. He's earned it. But to confront him in the mikdash like that is pretty astounding. So I will say there's another story like this. There's another story. So the Gemara says, Shuv Maisa b'Talmud Echa miTalmidei Beis Hillel shehevi olaso la'azara. So there was another story of another Talmud of Hillel. Right? Now this is Talmidei Beis Hillel. Shehevi olaso la'azara. Lismoch alav. And he brought his olah to the Beis HaMikdash to do smicha. So we'll say, so remember again, same story. Except now it's not Hillel, it's his student. Ultimately, again, bringing olah smicha. Good. Matzu Talmud Acher Echad miTalmidei Beis Shammai. So let's get ready for this. Another Talmud of Beis Shammai confronted this Talmud of Beis Hillel. Amrlo Ma zu smicha. So the Talmud of Beis Shammai said the Talmud of Beis Hillel, literally Ma zu smicha, which is, as Rashi says over here, Ma zu smicha she'atarotza lismoch v'lavar Beis Shammai v'lo anu cholkin aleichem. So he said to him literally, what is up with this smicha? What are you doing with the smicha? The Talmud of Beis Hillel responds, Amar lo, mazu shtika. What is up with your silence? Now, again, what he was telling him was, be quiet. Be quiet. So the Talmud of Beis Shammai said to the Talmud of Beis Hillel, mazu smicha. What's up with your smicha? The Talmud of Beis Hillel responded, what's up with your shtika? Right? What's up with your silence? Meaning, be quiet. Shasko ben Aziva b'halachlo. The Talmud of Shammai was silenced, and the Talmud of Hillel left. Shabbos Abaye says, Amar Abaye, Hilchach, Haitzura Mirabanan, the Amar Lechavre Milsa. Shabbos, you see something very important over here. That when a Talmud Chacham is insulted, Lo Lehadir Le Milsa, Tfei Mimai da Amar Lechavre. You should always have a proportionate response when someone insults you. But say, what an incredible life lesson. Sometimes, right, someone insults us and we're so hurt, we have a disproportionate response. You did that to me, I'll come back even stronger. So the Gemara says, it's okay to respond. It's okay to respond, but it must be a proportional response. So the Gemara says, don't respond more than what your friend initially said to you. Because the Talmud of Beis Shammai originally said to the Talmud of Beis Hillel, what's going on with your smicha? And the Talmud of Beis Hillel responds, what's up with your silence? So we'll say, so first of all, two incredible lessons that come out from this. Number one, that, well, actually, we'll focus on one for now, then we'll go back and loop it back in just a moment. But you see over here the need for a proportional response, right? A proportional response that sometimes, again, people wrong us, which happens, and there needs to be a response. That response needs to be measured. Sometimes when we get hurt and when we get upset, we lose control. And as a result, there's like an avalanche of emotion that comes back. So first of all, generally, when you do that, you look like the one who is unhinged and the one who has gone off the rails, and you generally lose any kind of moral high ground with all of that. So sometimes there's a need to respond, but the response must always be proportionate. Now, also, what I want to draw your attention to is something very interesting, which is the contrast between the two stories. Right? If you notice again, when Hillel was confronted, right? When Hillel was confronted, what does Hillel do? What does Hillel do? Nothing. In other words, he doesn't respond. He responds by essentially de-escalating. Right? That's what he does. He de-escalates. Right? He says, listen, you know what? You're not, no. Ola? No, it's not an Ola. This is a female. Want to see? Right? Want to see? Right? And again, they call it, he de-escalates. The Talmud responds, which I will say tells you something very important in life. That in life, there are times where de-escalation and silence are the best approach. And then there are times where a response is absolutely necessary. And this is hard, because there are some people who always respond, right? Not good. And then there are some people who are always silent, and that's also not good. Knowing when to be silent and de-escalate, and knowing when to respond is sometimes one of the hardest things in life. And I'll tell you something interesting I will say. I think this is the pshat maybe in the Mishnah also. Remember again, what did the Mishnah say about Beis Hillel? What was the shita of Beis Hillel? Beis Hillel omrim, mevi'in shlamim, va'olos, v'somchem. Remember that phrase. So perhaps that's this yisod. Beis Hillel says, sometimes mevi'in shlamim. Sometimes in life, what do you have to bring to the table? Shlamim. What's shlamim? Shlamim is shalom, right? Why is shlamim called shlamim? Everybody gets a piece. Koshwell gets a piece. Kohanim get a piece. The owners get a piece. It's shalom. Sometimes in life, you have to bring shlamim. Sometimes in life, the fight is just not worth it. It's just not worth it. You just have to figure out how to de-escalate. Sometimes, va'olos. They both say, what's an ola? What's an ola? An ola is kula l'Hashem. Ola represents taking a stand. Taking a stand, because sometimes in life you can't de-escalate, and sometimes in life you have to draw your line, and sometimes in life you have to take a stand. And if you figure out, ultimately again, how to create a balance between being a shlamim Jew, one who's able to de-escalate, make shalom, silence, and an ola Jew, one is able to draw his line and take a stand, what does the Mishnah say? Somchin aleihen. Such a person like this, such an approach to life, you could be samech on. Such an approach to life you could rely on. To find that balance between being an ola, between being a shlamim, somchin alein. Can't always be a shlamim, can't always be an ola, but if you figure out how to take both qualities and figure out when to use each, somchin alein, such an approach to life, you could rely on for success. Incredible yisod. Says the Gemara Tanya, Amar Beis Hillel Beis Shammai. So let's go later. So we'll say, so now we're going back a little bit. So now we're focusing a bit more on the Iker Machlokes. The Iker Machlokes. So the Iker Machlokes is Sham Beis Hillel. Remember again, really focuses on two areas. Number one, what can you bring? Right? So Beis Hillel, Olos Shlamim, Beis Shammai, Jesh Shlamim, and then the Smicha discussion as well. Beis Shammai, no Smicha on Yom Tiv, Beis Hillel, Smicha on Yom Tiv. Says the Gemara Tanya, Amr Lehem, Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai. I will say this is great. Beis Hillel said to Beis Shammai, Uma b'makom she'asr lehedyot muter legaboa. I've been in a situation where it's asr lehed, you can't do malacha for a private person, but yet you can do malacha for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But say, what is that referring to? Shabbos. Right? On Shabbos, I'm not allowed to do malacha, but yet in the mikdash, I could do malacha. In other words, when I say I could do malacha, I can bring karbanos. You're right, you can bring karbanos to Kadosh Baruch Hu. However, therefore, makom shemuter lehedyo, certainly in a situation where it is mutter to do malacha for an individual. When is it mutter to do malacha for an individual? On Yom Tiv, ochel nefesh. So, certainly you could do anything for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why Beis Hillel posits you could even bring olos. You can even bring olos. Because at the end of the day, anything, if I'm allowed to do malacha for me, I could do anything for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Amar Beishamai will say, no, not necessarily. Nidarim unedavos yochichu. I'll prove to you that point is not necessarily true, based on nidarim and nidavos. How so? Shemuter lehedyot. Because remember again, based on yesterday's daf, everyone agrees that what? That on Yom Tiv, you cannot bring Nidarim and Nidavos. So, Beis Shabbos says, you hear what's happening over here? Beis Hillel wants to say to Shammai, listen, of course you could bring Olos and Shlomim on Yom Tiv, because think about the following Kavachomer. If on Shabbos I can't do Malacha for myself, but I can do Malacha, so to speak, for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yom Tiv, where I can do Malacha for myself, i.e. Ochel Nefesh, certainly I can bring any type of carbon for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Fush Beis Shammai says, that's not true. Because even on Yom Tiv, you can't bring any carbon. V'haraya, you can't bring what? You can't bring what? Nidarim and Nidavos. Can't bring voluntary offerings. Shamoto lehedyot, vaso legavoa. Ultimately, again. So Beis Shammai says, look at Nidarim and Nidavos. Amar lahem, Beis Hillel, Beis Hillel says, it's not a good raya, I'll tell you why. Ma linidarim l'nidavos, she'in kavua lahem zman. It's different. The reason you can't bring Nidarim and Nidavos on Yom Tov is for a different reason, which is why? Why? You don't have to. You don't have to. In other words, they could just as easily be brought before Yom Tov or after Yom Tov. So there's nothing pushing you to bring it on Yom Tov itself. Tomar ba'olas re'iyah shekavu alazman. But yet say the olas re'iyah. So because remember again, this point of contention Timei Shammai Sila is really with the olos that are associated with Yom Tiv. So the Olas Re'iyah, which is the Olah that every male is obligated to bring when he comes to Yerushalayim on the Regalim. So remember again, so Beis Hillel will say to Beis Shammai, you're right, you can't bring Nidarim and Nidavos. That's because they don't really have to be brought on Yom Tiv. But in Olas Re'iyah, which is associated with Yom Tiv. Now again, do you have to bring your Olas Re'iyah on Yom Tiv? Do you have to bring it on Yom Tiv? Yeah. No, you can bring it when? Erev Yom Tiv. Right? Erev Yom Tiv. And the truth is, even if you get bring it after Yom Tiv. But Lamaisa, again, point that Beis Hillel is trying to make is that anything that is tethered to Yom Tiv should be able to be brought on Yom Tiv itself. Amar lahes, the Gemara says, Tomar, Olas Re'iyah v'shekavod lazman. Amar Beis Shammai, Shammai says, that's still not a good raya. Af zu ein kavu lazman. The truth is, even the Olas Re'iyah is not bound by time. How do I know this? Disnan, mishalo chag b'yom tev rishon shal chag. Both say, if a person did not bring his Olas Re'iyah on the first day of Yom Tov, both say, incredible. Chag generally first to Sukkot, right? Incredible. Erev Yom Tov. Whoever did not bring his Olas Re'iyah on the first day of Yom Tov, shal chag chogeg v'holech kol haregel kulo. He can bring it over the entire Yom Tov. V'yom Tov ha'achron shal chag. You could even bring it when? On Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres. So I will say, so the point that Beis Shammai is making is, to a certain degree, Olas Re'iyah is also not bound by time. Now the truth is, it's bound a little bit more by time. In that what? You ideally need to bring it sometime over Yom Tiv, but Lamaisa, it doesn't have to be brought per se on Yom Tiv itself. Right? And therefore, halacha lamaisa, it should be like Nidarim and Nidavos. Amar Beis Hillel, af zu kavu lazman. It's not true. The Olas Re'iyah also is time bound. How so? Disnan. Offer haregel v'lo chag. Listen to this. If Yom Tov goes by, and what? You did not bring your carbon chagiga, or your Olas Re'iyah, eino chai b'achri yuso. We'll say, it is time bound, because what happens? If you did not go, if Yom Tov passed and you didn't bring your Olas Re'iyah, you didn't bring your chagiga, guess what? You don't bring it. Which tells you that although there is a larger window to bring it, at the end of the day, it is still time bound. So the Gemara says, Beis Shammai says, but the pasuk says, Lochem. But this is incredible doing this sugis today. Right? The pasuk says, Lochem. That ultimately, again, what malacha are you permitted to go ahead and do on Yom Tiv? You're permitted to go ahead and do things, L'tzorach ochal nefesh, for you. That's what you're allowed to do. Lochem. V'lo legavoa. But Abba say he can't do malacha ultimately again for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? Meaning the heter of ochel nefesh ultimately again applies for food preparation or food consumption for the individual. Does not apply for carbonic purposes. The pasuk says LaHashem, which teaches us Kol de LaHashem. Anything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs for Yom Tiv, so to speak, you're allowed to go ahead and do. Im kain ma Talmud lomar lachem. So if that's the case, if LaHashem tells you that anything for sacrificial purposes is actually going to be permitted, then what does lachem come to limit? Lachem v'lo lekusim, lachem v'lo leklavim. I will say what it means is that the heter of ochel nefesh only applies to Jews, not to kusim, and ultimately again, lechem v'lo leklavim, not to your animals. So I will say, so interestingly enough, the heter of ochel nefesh only applies for fellow Jews, does not apply. Kusim is even a stronger deal, because remember, kusim is like a suffix about what their status. And not only can I not do malacha for kusim, I can't do malachim for Gentiles, nor can I do malacha for my animals. Says the Gemara. Abishol om Rabbalashon Acheres. Abishol had a different version of the previous in Shabbosai. So bottom line, the machlokes Beisham Beisil is something very interesting over here, which is that what are we allowed to do on Yom Tiv? It's really a fundamentally yesodistic machlokes about what type of sacrificial service becomes permitted on Yom Tiv, if any. So essentially, really what Beis Shammai is only going to allow is a type of sacrificial service which also serves your Yom Tiv needs. So that's why Beis Shammai holds that what can you bring on Yom Tiv? What can you bring? A shlamim. Right? But anything that is just kula LaHashem, interestingly enough, you can't bring. Now, I want to be clear. Beis Shammai is not arguing on karbanos tzibor. Right? He's not arguing on communal offerings. Obviously, communal offerings are offered every day, right? The Talmud Shal Shachar, Talmud Shal Bein Arbayim, the Ketaris, that's always done. We're talking about individual karbanos right now. So Beis Shammai says, if it doesn't serve a Yom Tiv need for you, an Ochel Nefesh need, you can't use it. So Shlomim give you meat. That's why you could use it. Olos can't use it. Beis Hillel essentially operates with this yesod of LaHashem. And just like Lachem teaches me I can do what I need for me, LaHashem teaches me that I can do whatever I need for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So both say, so listen to this. Abishol had the same conversation, the same back and forth, just a little bit of a different verbiage. Listen to this. Abishol b'lashon acheres, uma b'makom shekiras chastuma, kiras rabcha psucha. In a situation where your oven is closed, your master's oven is open. We'll say, what does that refer to? Once again, Shabbos. Shabbos, your oven is closed, right? You can't cook. Your master's oven is open. There's still karbanos that are happening in the Beis Hamikdash, even on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, "B'makom shekiras psucha, ein odin shekiras rabcha psucha." In a situation where your oven is open, i.e., when Yom Tiv, certainly the oven of your master is open as well. You should be able to bring even olos. V'chein bedin. And the truth is, this seems to be correct. Why? Shloye shulchancha malei v'shulchan rab charekan. Wow, boss is so beautiful. How could it be on Yom Tiv that your table is full and your master's table is empty? Right? I'll say, what an incredible yisod. In other words, we're okay. So in the carbonic sense, what it's saying is, how could it be that you're going to have all of this beautiful stuff for Yom Tiv and yet you're holding back carbonos from your master? I will say, what it also tells you is that when it comes to avodas Hashem, I have to be willing to exert myself for the Ribono Shel Olam as much as I'm willing to exert myself for myself. Right? That the same way, what would I do to fill my table? What am I willing to do to be successful in life? What am I willing to do to make money? What am I willing to do, again, to be a success, however you define success? What am I willing to do? So the hope is that most of us, the correct answer is, I'm willing to do everything. I'm willing to work as hard as I need to work in order to be as successful as I possibly can be. Fantastic. That same work ethic that we apply to our personal success has to be applied to our spiritual success as well. Shaloye shulchan chamale. It can't be that the table of your success is full, the shulchan rab charekan, and the table of my master of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is empty. However hard I'm willing to work for my success, which I think Rabbi say for most of us, is pretty hard, is the same work ethic I need to bring to my ruchnius. An incredible yisod. So my kamiflagi. So I'll say ultimately again, so the two versions kind of seem to be saying the same thing. But obviously if it's two different versions, unless you're arguing about something. So my kamiflagi, to which Gemara says, so my kamiflagi, Like of Gimar Savar, Nidarim and Nedavas Kraven B'Yamtiv. One opinion will say that according to this approach, you could go ahead and offer up Nidarim and Nedavas. Umar Savar ain't Kraven B'Yamtiv. And the other opinion will say, no, you can't go ahead and offer up Nidarim and Nedavas. Right? So according to the second approach about the table being full, it sounds like you should be able to offer up Nidarim and Nedavas as well. First opinion would say no. So the Gemara says, Rav Huna, the Divrei Omer Nidarim and Nedavas ain't Kraven B'Yamtiv. So we'll say, so therefore again, what we have over here is fundamental machlokes Yishan Beisilel, just two different ways of framing the machlokes. Now the Gemara is going to go ahead and just focus on this Nedarim and Nedavas B'Yamtiv for just a moment. So the Gemara says, L'divrei ha'omer Nedarim and Nedavas ein kreivim b'Yamtiv. According to the opinion who says that you can't offer up Nedarim and Nedavas on Yamtiv. Listen to this. Lo tema midaraisa michza chazu v'rabbanon hu tegazu b'hu. We'll say it's not the pshat that midaraisa you could really offer up Nedarim and Nedavas, right? You could really offer them up. But it's the rabbis, it's the Rabbanon, it's Chazal who stepped in and said that you can't. Why? Gezerah Shema Yisha. Because they will say, listen to this. You could, perhaps you want a taina, that Mida Araisa, you can offer up Nedarim and Nedavas on Yom Tiv, right? How can you say that? They will say, if you go with Beis Hillel's idea of La Hashem, anything that is La Hashem could be offered up, that would seem to include what? Nedarim and Nedavas. So why can't you offer up Nedarim? Oh, because the rabbis came along, the Chazal came along and said, we don't want you doing that. Why? Shema Yisha. But says Shema Yisha means what? We're concerned that you're going to tarry and bring your kavanos. Because think about this. If I know that I could bring my Nedarim and Nedavas on Yom Tiv, am I making a special trip to Yerushalayim to bring my Nedarim and Nedavas? B'Pashtos? No. B'Pashtos? No. What am I going to do? I'll just bring it with me when I'm coming to Yerushalayim anyway. Chazal were concerned about that because they both say if somebody makes a neder or nedava, we want them to go ahead and honor their pledge as quickly and expeditiously as possible. So therefore, again, Chazal said, don't. So you might have thought that according to the opinion who says you can't bring nedarim and nedavas on Yom Tiv, really mid'araisa you can, but midrabanon we said you can't. Shema yishha. That's not true. The truth is, Rabbi say, mid'oraisa, you really can't bring nedarim and nedavas. How do we know that? Because Rabbi said the shtei alechem, right, which is the offering ultimately on Shavuos, the shtei alechem, which was an obligatory offering. V'leka lemigzar shema yisha, and therefore it's by shtei alechem, you can't bring in a tain of shema yisha, right? No one's concerned shema yisha, because remember again, you have to bring it on Shavuos, and yet ve'ino docha lo asa Shabbos v'lo asa Yom Tov, and yet again the shtei alechem is not docha Shabbos, not docha Yom Tov, and therefore I will say you begin to see that what that halacha l'maisa, according to the opinion who holds that nedarim and nedavas are not brought on Yom Tiv, that's mid'oraisa. That's mid'oraisa, they're not brought on Yom Tiv. So they both say, so how do we paskin in this? So let's work backwards a little bit. So remember again, we already saw this halacha, I already mentioned this to you yesterday. We paskin that we do not bring nedarim and nedavas on Yom Tiv. We don't bring nedarim and nedavas on Yom Tiv. They both say in the machlokes Yishan Beisilel, I'll show you. Mir Hashem, we'll do the daf tomorrow on Yom Tiv. I'll show you the Rambam tomorrow, Mir Hashem. But we'll see that the Rambam is going to paskin like Beisilel, namely that halacha l'maisa, you could bring shlamim and you could bring olos on Yom Tiv. They'll say pretty much, so you can bring shlam and olos, but remember, your license to bring shlamim and olos is limited to what? Karbanos related to Yom Tiv. Right? So we pass like Beitzah, you can even bring olos, but it's got to be Yom Tiv olos. And lastly, we are going to see that we paskin takif l'smicha shchita. That halacha l'maisa smicha itself must occur right before shchita. But say we'll stop over here. Wishing everyone a beautiful, uplifting, and meaningful Yom Tiv. Looking forward to continuing the daf over Yom Tiv. Shkoyach.
Can't make food preparations for animals? Like malacha, with oil nefesh?
Did it work on YouTube?
Yeah.
Oh, you stopped it.
No, I'll stop the by accident.
Oh gosh.
Oh. What happened?
I don't know.